Loneliness is the worst enemy. The fact of the matter is that if loneliness is your enemy, you will be defeated. Okay? You can't beat loneliness. So you have to learn to make a friend out of loneliness. What's loneliness? Well, it's very simple. It's not being alone. Rather, loneliness is the feeling that you do not matter to anyone on this earth. Okay? Now, the fact of the matter is, it's a feeling that everybody has experienced at one point or another, and some of us have felt it for a majority of our lives. Now, whether this is true or not is irrelevant. It's a subjective feeling. It's a subjective emotion. And it's a powerful emotion. And it's something that you have to guard against. You have to make friends of loneliness. Simple as that. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, see, loneliness, like I said, it's that feeling that you don't matter to anyone in this world. And that's why the worst times that you feel loneliness is when you're in a crowd. When you're in a crowd of people and they're strangers to you. When you're alone in a crowd of people and they're all happy and they don't even see you because you're not part of their group. You know, you see this when you go to some club, for instance. You go to a club and you go to a club on your own and you don't know anybody there. And you get there and what? All the people there, they're in little groups. I mean, if only just two people together. You know, maybe it's two guys who are looking to find some girl or something, you know, you just pick up a girl for the night or whatever. Or maybe it's just like a gaggle of girls all together and they're on their, I don't know, some bachelorette party or whatever the fuck. It doesn't matter. See, everybody there is in a group and you're alone. And they're all laughing and having a good time and you're just by yourself. And, you know, yeah, that's the kind of loneliness you feel. That kind of misery. And the absolute worst kind of loneliness that you can ever experience is that loneliness that you encounter when you're with the people who are supposed to love you. Your parents and siblings or maybe your spouse or girlfriend. And you feel that you don't even matter to them. Now that's a crushing kind of loneliness. And that's a loneliness that I myself have felt a time or two. Yeah, sure. Everybody has. You see, loneliness is sort of like a product of the society that we currently live in. See, the society that we have has a lot of pros and a lot of cons. Now, among the pros are that you can be anything you want to. You're not tied down to what you were born into. One of the great advantages of liberal democracies is that you can change who you are. You could be born the child of, I don't know, a garbage man and wind up, you know, being rich as Bill Gates or whatever. And yeah, it's not that simple that just working at it will get you there. No, you have to do a lot of sacrifices and just a lot of hoops and what have you. But the point is, see, we have a great deal of freedom in our society. Freedom to be whomever we decide to be. But by the same token, that freedom opens the door to loneliness. See, the kind of loneliness that we experience is not very common in more structured or more rigid societies. In more rigid societies, more quote-unquote traditional societies, where everybody sort of like stays where they were their entire life, there's a great deal of dissatisfaction, but not loneliness, you see? And that leads to the problem, because you see, when you have more freedom to be whatever you want to, and more freedoms and more opportunities to transform yourself into whatever you imagine you'd like to be, the cost of that is loneliness. And more rigid societies where you're sort of like set for life, you're born into one slot and you're going to stay there forever. Those societies, that rigidity, that lack of the ability to move, that lack of freedom, well, the flip side of that is that you're always with the people who care about you. You're always in a group of people who've known you your entire life, who've watched you grow from the time you were a child, a toddler, a baby, all the way to the grown man that you are now. You see? So, I mean, everything comes with pros and cons. And the freedom that we have today, it's a wonderful freedom, but it comes with the cost of loneliness. And you have to understand that, and you have to understand its origin, and you have to understand why you yourself feel it. You're feeling lonely because you feel that you don't matter to anybody in the world, right? Right. So, rather than me telling you how to solve this problem, i.e. go out there and make yourself important to people close to you, what have you, well, before you can do that, you have to make friends with loneliness. And what do I mean by that? You have to sort of like do a mental exercise. Now, there were a number of years when I felt extremely lonely, okay? That loneliness was just crushing me. And I sort of like eluded this loneliness by different methods, by different vehicles. One of them is work. A lot of people do this. They sort of like distract themselves from their loneliness by way of work. Women do this especially. You know, there are a lot of these professional women who feel unbelievably lonely. Their loneliness is killing them, and so they dive headfirst into their work. I remember working at this law firm when I was, like 22 or so, in 92, I think, or yeah, something like that, it doesn't matter. I was working at this law firm, and there were these lawyers there, and the female lawyers, and they would work insane hours. They didn't have a husband or a boyfriend, or at least not a serious boyfriend, certainly didn't have any children. And they would work, I'm talking, you know, from like 6 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And they'd work on the weekends too. And they were superstars. But, you know, it was sort of like so obvious to an outsider. What they were doing was that they were using work to alleviate the loneliness because they didn't know how to handle it. And I myself have been guilty of this. Some of the most productive periods in my life, insofar as work is concerned, were periods where I felt unbelievably lonely. I mean, a lonesomeness that is the worst kind of prison, right? I learned a lot from that. I was very successful during those periods, but with more success came more loneliness, more alienation. And so, over the years, decades really, of having to deal with my own loneliness, I came to the conclusion that to make friends with loneliness, you have to sort of like, and this is going to sound sort of stupid, but bear with me, you have to make friends with yourself. You have to almost have like internal conversations with yourself as if you were somebody else. Okay, this is going to sound really psychotic or like psychopathic or whatever, or schizophrenic. Yeah, this sounds very schizophrenic. You have to have conversations with yourself. What the fuck do you mean, CRP? Let me explain. See, sometimes I'm walking down the street, as I was just now, as a matter of fact. I went to have lunch with my family, and I came to the studio, and I was walking along and thinking about doing this video. And I was walking along and thinking of doing this video, and I was remembering something that happened to me when I was a teenager, a moment of sheer and utter embarrassment, right? And I laughed about it. I laughed about it because it was very funny. I'm not going to tell you what it was because it's so embarrassing that I don't want to, I don't want it to be registered on this channel. But believe me, it was something incredibly embarrassing. And I laughed about it. I didn't feel embarrassed because the person I used to be was just another person. This happened when I was like, I don't know, 15, 16 years old, this moment of incredible embarrassment. And I looked at the memory and I laughed because it had happened to like another guy. And as I was thinking about something that had happened the week before, something unrelated, a conversation I had had in real life with somebody here, I thought of how I'd interacted there, and I was looking at myself as if I were somebody else. And all of a sudden I got to thinking about it, and that's why I wanted to do this particular video now. I got to thinking to myself that what was going on was that, see, I looked at myself as a different person. There was the me of today, of the moment, of the now, the right now. And then there were all these other versions of who I had been in the past. The guy I had been the week before, the guy I had been the year ago, the guy I'd been, the kid I'd been, the child I'd been decades ago. There were different versions of myself, and I looked at them as different people, as memories of people. And I realized that in my own life, the periods of loneliness that I've been able to handle best have been when I sort of like, how can I put this? I treat myself as a best friend. I think of myself as somebody else. And I sort of like listen to myself and have conversations with myself. And I know this sounds all very schizophrenic and almost slightly psychotic, I would suppose. You know, maybe some shrink or something will tell me to take Zoloft or Prozac or whatever the fuck. But see, it works for me. It works for me of sort of like being my own best friend and articulating to myself what's going on in my life as if I had somebody else who was listening to me and caring about what was happening to me. You see what I mean? It's sort of like a little kind of mental trick, you know? And when I'm alone, and when I start to feel lonely, well, it sort of like evaporates pretty quickly because I continue to have these internal conversations between myself, the now, the person who I am at this moment, and the man I used to be in the days and weeks and months and years behind me. And I have conversations almost with the guy I want to be in the future, because I'm 50 and there are still versions of myself I want to be. And I kind of like, and this is going to sound psycho as fuck, but I kind of like have conversations with the guy I want to be in the future, and I ask him how he got to be the way that he is. And I imagine those conversations. And it helps me get there. Does this make any sense? I don't know if I'm going to post this video, okay? I mean, because I'll have to see it in the editing suite when I edit it. I'm going to have to figure out if I sound like a complete loon. But yeah, you have to make friends with your loneliness by making friends with yourself. You have to sort of like split yourself, you know, in a fairly schizophrenic way, and talk to yourself and be your own best friend. I don't know if this sounds incredibly insightful and profound or incredibly stupid, but it's what works for me. It works for me because I've learned to be afraid of my loneliness. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That loneliness that is so soul-crushing that you feel you want to die. And it's not even that you want to die. No, it's that you wish you'd never existed. That loneliness, that feeling of being bereft of anyone who would care for you. I've certainly felt that. I certainly have. And it is the worst feeling. No other feeling comes close to it. You know? I'm sure there are potential great tragedies or great and horrible things that can befall you that would be worse than that, but so far I haven't experienced any of those, thank goodness. That loneliness, that feeling of just crushing aloneness, and that nobody gives a shit about you. I'm not going to give you some bullshit that, oh no, there is somebody who cares about you, don't worry, you know, I care about you. That's bullshit, come on. What the fuck, you know? If you feel that nobody gives a shit about you, it's probably because nobody does give a shit about you. Okay, that's the reality of it. I mean, you don't feel lonely when people around you care about you. You don't feel that loneliness, that soul-crushing loneliness, when you're, at a great barbecue with the people who love you and you're all having a wonderful time. Now, do you? Of course not. And more often than not, if you have that loneliness, that crushing, soul-crushing loneliness, which is basically that feeling that you don't matter to anyone on this earth, it's more often than not true. That's the problem with it, see? If it were just a figment of our imagination, it would be easy to solve. Or let me phrase that, if it were a figment of our imagination, we'd ignore it. We wouldn't feel it. See, sometimes I get to the studio awful early, right? 6 a.m. because I get a lot accomplished early in the morning, right? So I get here at 6 a.m., right? And you know, they let me in, and I come up here to the 5th floor, and the lights are still off, right? And see, for a second, you know, I have to walk down the hallway, and I turn on the flashlight on my cell phone, right? I have to walk down the hallway to flick the lights on because they're like far from the elevator. I don't know why they did that, but they did. Anyway, the point is, see, when I'm walking that little stretch, that might be, you know, I don't know, 30 feet or something like that down the hallway. You know, a little part of my mind, a little part of my imagination thinks, oh, you know, maybe there's a monster. And it's stupid, of course, because there is no such thing as monsters. And of course, even if there were such things as monsters, there are no monsters in the fucking hallway. I'm 50 fucking years old and I still imagine that. I mean, that's sad enough. But you don't feel afraid of things that aren't true. You might like sort of like kid yourself or like sort of like pretend to yourself that, oh, maybe there is a monster, but you don't really, right? But if you feel that nobody cares about you, it's probably because nobody cares about you. Nobody truly cares about you. You shouldn't fool yourself. It's all good and fine to fool yourself and pretend that there might be a monster, so you better run to hit that light switch. It's all good and fine to do that. But see, if you feel that soul-crushing loneliness, it's because you know that nobody gives a shit about you. And see, there starts the end of the feeling. Because once you realize that nobody gives a shit about you, then you realize what you have to do. What you have to do is simplicity itself. You have to build something, a family or a network of people who do care about you. And you have to go out in the world and look for these people because they're there. And that's the thing, that's the point. If you feel this incredible soul-crushing loneliness, apart from having to make friends with this feeling of loneliness, you got to go out there and find the people who can kill it for you. Yeah. Well, that's what I did, at least.